Today's guest had the most prolific high school football career of any quarterback in California state history, throwing for over 16,000 yards and 229 touchdowns. He set many state and national records, while winning Gatorade Player of the Year twice and leading his team, Folsom High School, to a state championship in 2014. He set more records at the University of Washington, where he won Offensive Player of the Year for the Pac-12 in 2016, led his team to a college football playoff appearance, and came in 6th in the Heisman voting. Following UW, he went undrafted, was signed by the Minnesota Vikings, and is now a member of the Cincinnati Bengals. I hope you enjoy this episode with Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Jake Browning. All right, we are back for episode 12 of Under the Number. This time we're joined by Jake Browning, current Cincinnati Bengal quarterback, former UW Husky, former Folsom High School Bulldog. Jake, thanks for jumping on such short notice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I'm going to start us off with something from your Instagram account that you posted not too long ago. And this was a note that you wrote to yourself right after you had gotten cut by the Minnesota Vikings in 2021. You said, So now what? Right now, my plan is to figure out somewhere to volunteer coaching and continue to stay in shape in case I get a call for a tryout somewhere. There's always the possibility of a comeback, but I do not want to let the chance of that keep me from living my life. I'm currently in the process of figuring out what my options are as far as volunteer coaching and hope to have made a decision within the next week or so. Hopefully, it is a situation where I can learn as much as possible while being able to see Steph a healthy amount and keep my expenses low, since I will probably not be making any money. I have an optimistic feeling about my future as a coach, and I think part of that is coming from the feeling that I somewhat have some control over my life again. Talk about what was going on in your life as you sat on a plane and crafted that note to yourself.
Yeah, I think I kind of do that whenever there's, kind of feel like there's a fork in the road, trying to figure out what's going to come next. But yeah, I mean, up to that point, I had a good amount of success in college and in the NFL. Just came out, went undrafted, didn't play a ton in that first preseason. Played like maybe a quarter and a half total. Basically, I got told, hey, we're going to hide you and put you on practice squad. I'll let you develop for a year. So did that. Then next year was kind of like, all right, now's your chance to try and win a backup job. Well, then COVID happened, so there was no preseason. So go through a whole nother year of basically doing nothing but getting ready for the next preseason. So the next preseason comes and they draft a guy, have a really good camp, but I played probably a little less than 2 quarters total, and so and it didn't play well enough in those 2 quarters to stick around, so got cut. Kind of a weird deal how it all went down. So kind of left a bitter taste on it all, because just felt like, man, I'm working really hard, doing all the things I'm supposed to do. So it's not really working out. And so I got cut. I think it was on maybe like a Wednesday or a Thursday. Had plans to already go back to Seattle for the weekend to go watch the Huskies play the Montana Grizzlies. And so was back there, and on the way there, wrote that out. Had some things lined up to try and go get into coaching. I had been in the NFL for 2 years, but hadn't made enough money up to that point to not do anything or not have something lined up next. And I think even if I did, I always want to be doing something. And I didn't really want to be someone like, sitting around stagnant, hoping that something happens. So kind of had it lined up to go to go help out at Oregon State, where my former offensive coordinator was. And then I think it was maybe Monday, my agent, or no, even that Saturday, my agent was like, where's your head at? And I said, I don't know. I'm all bitter, basically. And he said, all right, I'm going to call every team one more time and see what happens. I'm like, okay, sounds good. And kind of thinking like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, but get a call Monday, said, hey, Cincinnati wants to bring you out for a tryout tomorrow. Go get on a plane. And so went out to Cincinnati. They only had two quarterbacks on the roster. Did a workout there and got signed. And ironically, it was the first game that they had that season was against Minnesota. So it was in hindsight, it was the best thing that happened to me. Getting out of Minnesota and ended up in Cincinnati, and being there for when I signed there, I wasn't really thinking we were going to be any good because the Bengals hadn't been good in a long time, and I was just kind of happy to have a job. And then we ended up going to the Super Bowl, and I ended up feeling like, okay, I'm getting a lot better. And but at the time of that note, yeah, it's just you want to feel like you got. Yeah, for anybody like myself that's willing to work hard, like you just want to feel like it's going towards something. And so you're working really hard, putting all these hours, doing all these things, feeling kind of underappreciated. And then when it's time to, show your worth, you're not even really getting the chance to show it. So, it can be frustrating if you come to the league as an undrafted guy. You kind of are. The only way you make teams is if you play well in the preseason. And so I had no leverage. I was doing really well in practice and just not playing at all.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of amazing to think that you were on sidelined on the waiver wire, not on a roster, about to turn to coaching, given the insanely illustrious high school and college career you already had under your belt. For anyone who followed California high school football in the 2010s, I guess, you should absolutely know who Jake Browning is. Your high school stat line, it literally looks like it's riddled with typos. It does not make sense, some of the numbers that you racked up. For context, I like to think I had a pretty good high school quarterback career. Started for 3 years, finished with, I think, 70 total touchdowns, maybe just under,
Yeah.
and I think 7,000 yards. Broke school records, broke some county records. That's 70 career and 7,000, give or take, career yards. You
Yeah.
have over 16,000 yards, 226 touchdowns, and in your first start, I read, in your first high school start, you threw for 689 yards and 10 touchdowns.
Yeah.
How is that even possible? Genuinely.
Yeah, Folsom. I think there's only, I don't know what it is now. There's probably 80 to 100,000 people there. I think every kid that grows up there at least tries out for football one year. The junior program, if there's 5 teams, 3 or 4 of them win the championship every single year. So, it's a pretty well-oiled machine. And then when I got to high school, you're a Stanford guy. Your guys' head coach now, Troy Taylor. He was my high school coach, so I'd known him since I was like 10 years old. And it's kind of one of those things where, like I said before, like I've always worked really hard, but meeting him and having just so happened to grow up, across the street from a high school that he randomly decided to coach at, was a pretty big accelerator. I think my stats look crazy if you compare them to other schools, and I definitely had some success, but I think I was like the 5th quarterback to break all those records. Every single year, just keep breaking them with these Folsom quarterbacks, and so it was a well-oiled machine. And I think my year we had 7 or 8 guys go Division I. For my senior year, we got 3 of us are in the NFL, and then all of our coaches are either at Sac State or Stanford now. So it's kind of one of those small, like you would expect something like that to happen in a bigger city, but it's pretty cool. Folsom's definitely a football town. So yeah, you add all those together, and then you kind of come out with some crazy stats.
Yeah, well, no kidding. Talk about, you said you knew Troy Taylor from the time you were 10 years old, and it sounds like he was pretty instrumental in your development. Talk about the importance of having a mentor overall and what mentorship can do for someone at the quarterback position, and more on a more of a personal level, what it was like having your mentorship come from Troy Taylor.
Yeah, yeah. I met him when I was 10. I think it gets kind of blown up that I was like, some kid that was just, private quarterback coach since I was whatever age. I don't think if you were there, it wasn't really like that. I'd go for like an hour, a couple Sundays a year. Definitely knew who he was, but my dad kind of said, "Hey, you can do this, but you're going to have to do extra chores or whatever." And so I'd go do that. But I would say early on, biggest mentors were my dad played at Oregon State and is still a big influence in my life. And then our junior football coach my dad worked a pretty busy job, so he would be one of the assistant coaches. But the head coach was Kurt Crandall, and he just made football feel like it was really important and it was really fun and we were good. And I think when you're like 8 to 13 years old, you kind of look at the parents around you a little bit, and he made it feel like I mean, everybody asks like, who is your biggest like idol growing up, and mine's always whoever the local Folsom High School starting varsity quarterback was. I thought was like the coolest person ever, because I just lived in this ecosystem where football was very important, and that started with my dad early on, but then Kurt Crandall later. And so then fast forward, we have all these years of success in junior football, and the high school is really good. And then I get to high school, and I already had a relationship with Coach Taylor, but that's kind of where it took off. Is I'd spend every lunch in there with him, going over stuff, going over practice, different things, and then I just spent a ton of time with him, and it didn't really feel like it was a grind because I really liked it. It was enjoyable, and I think that's a sign of a good mentor is you spend a lot of time with them. They really invest in you, but you don't really feel like there's some type of pressure or like this is some duty I have to do. Like I genuinely look back, and even if football hadn't worked out the way it has, I think very highly of those times, and they were really fun times. So I don't really like the stereotype of like I had some helicopter parents and I was some private coach, all this and that. Like I definitely worked to get to the point where when I did meet Coach Taylor and spend a lot of time with him, that I was able to make the most of it.
How much did the way that Coach Taylor or other people that coached you just in your youth and high school time frame, how much did their coaching style rub off on you and in turn influence your leadership style to your other teammates?
Uh, I would say like my dad probably rubbed off a little bit more on some of those things. Like I think growing up there was always a big appreciation for like people that just worked, like whatever that job was. I was never sold on we're all equal or anything like that. And but everybody's got potential and you need to work hard to fulfill it, and that's kind of the burden of having that potential and putting the hard work in to make sure you maximize it. And then but just like a big appreciation for like people that maybe they don't work these really cool jobs, but like they get up, they work, and they provide. And so I think that was something that was kind of instilled in me early on. And so I've kind of felt like going through the years, like I do have a great appreciation, even before a bunch of years on practice squad. I had a big appreciation for the walk-ons on our team that they're paying to be there and they're grinding it out. And so I think when I've had success and been one of the better players on most of the teams I've been on, but I do have that appreciation for the guys that are grinding it out and working hard. And so I think there's something to be said about that. And then just also being in a situation where I'm not like a big rah go crazy before a game person, and so just being comfortable enough in my own skin to feel like I don't really need to do that, and having people around me that didn't try and make me do that. So I think that kind of helps too, because everybody can spot a fraud.
That sounds like a very Central Valley mindset, which I love in California. Like the Central
Yeah.
Valley, Sacktown, Folsom, it's not this is me saying this coming from Santa Barbara, where our coaches would say anytime we'd go, even as, far north as Atascadero, the rah-rah speech we would get was the coach saying, just so you know, every one of those kids is expecting you to be the most Santa Barbara soft, soft hands, dudes. Like it's a different. It's kind of like being in a different state, honestly. But I had some friends in college too, who are from the Central Valley, and I love them. There's a mindset attached to it.
Yeah, I definitely think there is, and I think where you grow up, everything has their pluses and minuses, but that's definitely one of the Central Valley is. I think you got an appreciation for just people at work. There's not a lot of you think of California, and whenever I'm in Ohio, people have this idea of being from California, and I'm like, let's say Sacramento. I don't, we're not surfer dudes or anything like that. Like it's definitely different than maybe like LA or San Francisco, but I really enjoyed growing up there.
So through this Folsom High School experience, which sounds amazing, like you became that starting quarterback that you had idolized as a kid, right? And you're breaking all these records and winning Gatorade Player of the Year, and not to mention winning a ton of games. I don't know how many games. How many games did you lose over the course of your varsity career?
Two, lost both to De La Salle my sophomore year and my junior year.
So 2 losses in 3 years is not so bad.
Yeah.
Um, as that success racked up, obviously offers in college, a lot of attention from big time programs came your way.
hmm
What was it that you were looking for in a program, and what was it that ultimately made you decide on Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt like through that whole process, like I had my dad who I trusted, I had my high school coach who I trusted, but both of them were kind of yes or no. Like, hey, don't think that's a good spot for you. But there were a lot of yeses, and so went visited. Had plans to visit like four or five. Visited Boise State, where we were in the same camp.
Yeah, small world.
Went visited Cal for a game, and then I went up to Washington, uh, and I just felt comfortable. I liked it. I remember my high school coach saying, he's like, that could be a pretty sweet situation because, it takes 3 years to establish a culture, and the third year of Coach Pete being there would be your sophomore year, and then you guys would probably be pretty good. And so I wanted to commit when I was there. My dad said, hey, just take one more visit to have something to compare it to. It's a big decision. And so I went to Wazoo, liked it, but just liked Washington. I liked Coach Pete. Felt, like I said, just felt comfortable there. Felt like I had a chance to go there and be a part of building something, and thought it had potential. So wasn't this long drawn out thing. Just committed and called it, and that was pretty much it.
Went on to have a spectacular career there. Your sophomore year in particular was incredible. I mean, the team had huge success. You ended up like sixth in the Heisman voting that year.
Yeah,
Um, so, I mean, and that was actually after you had started as a true freshman, right?
yeah, yeah. I started all 4 years there.
So, talk about the battle that first year, or just the QB room overall when you come in as this highly recruited freshman who totally was, I'm sure it was possible. Everyone knew it was possible that you were going to play. But when you enter a quarterback room full of a bunch of alpha males who all want one spot, it can make for an interesting situation. So, how did that go when you were a freshman?
Yeah, so they had a returning starter, Siler Miles, and I mean they didn't really promise anything or anything like that. So I had to go in and earn it. But right before we go on spring break, he had a bunch of issues with I think it was his hips, and so he ends up medically retiring. And so that kind of opens it up, which I don't think a lot of people even remember. I mean, if that doesn't happen, I'm probably who knows, but it definitely makes it a lot harder to put a freshman in when you have a returning starter. And I think they went like right around 500, went to a bowl game and were pretty good. So he medically retires, and then there were three of us. Um, and I was used to never throwing a pick, throwing a touchdown every drive. We were young on offense. We were really good on defense. So I graduated early. I went in January, did winter workouts, got destroyed, and then went into spring ball. That was the hardest football I had played up to that point, and just getting used to how you need to play in college, not losing what you had success with. So, that was very, very challenging. Going into training camp or fall camp, it was pretty open. There were three of us all competing. And then it really came down to we had a couple of live practices, and that's when I played really well. And so I ended up getting named the starter for week one, and then never really looked back from there.
So some of the guys who start for these Division One programs are just huge specimens who are playing quarterback. Like even who we just spoke to the other week, Jacob Eason is like every bit of 6'6", 230 with a rocket launcher for an arm. You are much more on the not small but smaller end of the spectrum. What was the key to either the developmental physical jumps that you were still able to make in college, or what is it that differentiates your game where you're not a Josh Allen, but you're as effective as he was in certainly at Washington?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like I've always had a really good feel in the pocket. I've always been pretty accurate. I've played a lot of football. I mean, up to that point, I was a true freshman, but I'd had probably more pass attempts than anyone in the world over the last 3 years. And so, I had a lot of reps. I had a really good high school coach, and I had a really high. I think the reason I started as a freshman is because I came in with a really high work capacity. Like the hours needed and the work that was needed to like improve at that rate, and then be able to push people that have been there for 3 or 4 years for a spot. I had that. Like that was not a big shock to me. And if anything, I think I kind of set a new standard there on preparation and stuff like that. Um, so I was fully obsessed. I think it's always kind of been like that. And I maybe don't look like I can move around like crazy, but I've always been more athletic than people think. And at the end of the day, like I never really feel like the moment has been too big. I can kind of detach from the ups and downs of it, and I can throw the shit out of the ball. And so that does still matter. And I've always been able to throw a really good spiral, be really accurate, and then when it comes down to it, and we go live, I'm not good at looking like I'm 6'6" or like I have a rocket arm, but I'm good at football, and that still matters.
How do you detach?
Just don't even. I don't know. Maybe it's a. I don't know if that's something you're born with or what, but yeah, I don't know. Whenever there's chaos going on, I think when the chaos goes up, I kind of go the opposite way and shut down and go calm. Um, and then when it's really quiet, I'm probably more alive than I am when it's really loud. So I don't know. Couldn't explain it to you, but I'm sure it's something that's got like some positive reinforcement and something developed, but there's probably a little bit that you just have grown up.
So when you think back to Washington, and we talked about it, a fantastic career, the offensive Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year. You played in a Rose Bowl against Ohio State, among many other huge games. When you like close your eyes this many years, 6 years on from being at Washington, and you think about specific moments that really stand out in your head, what are some of the most vivid memories from your career at UW?
Vivid memories. I mean, the Oregon game was one. It's because we hadn't beat them in a long. I don't even know how long. Playing Stanford the week before that 2 week span right there, we were pretty hot, and beat Stanford pretty good at home. I think we were both like top 5 or 6 ranked, and then
That
went and
was
beat.
like week 3 or week 4, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Uh, the two Pac-12 championships. Trying to think, but I think I have positive memories there, but I learned a lot. Like I think I focused too much on the development of the team trying to make sure everybody was good around me, and not enough on developing my own skills. Like I think I let that kind of take a back seat, and I think the general thing that I was told there was, once I played well my sophomore year, it was okay. Let's build up everything around you.
Yep.
Like, okay, well, I'm not a finished product at 20, 21, however old I was. I don't remember. Um, and so I think I kind of let up on the gas on that and tried to step into like taking on a lot more as in a leadership role, which is important. And I learned a lot there, but I think I could have done a lot more to develop. And I think as we go through the arc of it, um, I've developed a ton over the last 4 years, and it would have been good to have access to that information and feedback in college. And so I think that's kind of led me later in my career to actively seek that out and just know that it's not my job to make sure the receiver, knows what they're doing. Like that is the receiver coach's job. It's not my job to know that to make sure the tight end knows what they're doing. Like I can communicate, but at the end of the day, when you're on a team, there's a person whose job it is to make sure all those things happen. Like my job is to operate well at quarterback, and so uh, that's kind of been a major lesson that I learned from Washington. And I think at the same time, like I said, I have a lot of positive memories there. But I did get benched my senior year in the middle of a game at Cal. I think my takeaway there was, hey, people will lean on you to do their job, but if you're not doing yours well enough, like this game will bench you, and they don't give a shit. And so you need to make sure you're on top of your stuff. And if somebody else isn't on top of theirs, then they need to get benched or they need to get fired. And it happens quickly in this game. And so just being really focused on, all right, here's my actual job. And if the reality is with the position that I play, that job is important enough that if I just play well, we're probably going to win. And you're gonna win more often than not. So just focus on that. Don't try and take on too much.
When you think of the version of Jake Browning showing up as an early enrollee, like you said, about to get his ass kicked in winter workouts, and you compare that to the version of Jake Browning going into his pro day, wrapping up the time at UW, what stands out to you as the biggest change?
I think the biggest change would just be the experiences part. Having to go through, there weren't a ton of lows in my high school career. Like it was, we had 2 losses. Those sucked. The season ended, but we lost when I was a sophomore and a junior. Like I knew I was coming back. So if anything, it was motivating. And you're more just like kind of bummed that you didn't get it done for people that are done. But like my senior year, and we go win the state championship, and then and there wasn't a whole lot of downs. And so I think in my college career, we won a lot of games, but I dealt with a lot of criticism at a pretty public, at a school, at a pretty big college program in a big city. I dealt with a lot of criticism there and learned how to like take that and just keep on the path towards trying to win games. And so I would say that was the big thing. And I do think like the leadership stuff and like how to establish culture and things like that, I learned a lot too.
So back to that pro day timeline, pre-draft preparation. You went to the combine. But yeah, there's a lot of training and preparation that goes into, I guess, in that winter and spring once you've declared and before the actual draft takes place.
Yeah.
Get to the draft, you end up going undrafted. Number one, was that a shock to you?
No. I mean, I was kind of prepped to like, hey, be a later round guy or be undrafted. But whenever, how do I say this? I think the whole thing is, they build it up, but at the end of the day, like, I changed my whole throwing motion from the Rose Bowl game to the combine to pro day and showed, if you take the trajectory of how much improvement I had over 4 months, it was pretty drastic. Like I never played a rotational sport So I'd never played baseball, tennis, golf. So I never used my hips when I threw. And that was always the biggest thing, is I never had a strong arm. And so I'd run around in circles trying to figure out, like, okay, is it grip strength? Is it this? Is it that? Finally go to do some uh, high end, like, quarterback training. And they're like, hey, you don't use your hips at all. And so just focused on changing that. Like I said, made some large strides in that. But at the end of the day, nobody cared, because I already had this stamp of, like, doesn't have a strong arm, doesn't do this. And so I remember at the combine, Mark Brunell, who I don't know at all, but he went to Washington. He sat up there on a panel and he's like, I think out of all the quarterbacks, Jake Browning threw the best. It wasn't in, like, no question. And everybody kind of, laughed and was like, oh, you're just rooting for the UW guy. And he was like, no. But if you watch it, like, if you break it down and you're really paying attention, then yeah, I did make some big strides. And so, I knew I was probably going to be a later round pick or be undrafted, but I knew that I had an avenue that I hadn't fully pursued yet that I could get a lot better.
So end up getting the call from Minnesota, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you showed up for camp, mini camp, training camp, what was initially said to you? Was the expectation that you were going to be on the practice squad, or was this? How does that actually work? Because you ended up on their practice squad for 2 years. How did it
Yeah.
start though in Minnesota?
Yeah. So I've kind of had both happen where, somebody will say, like, hey, Minnesota was basically like, hey, this is an open competition. But then when it came down to reps, like, the guy that ended up being the two took every rep with the twos. So you're like, is this an open competition? It doesn't really seem like it. Versus in Cincinnati, you don't want to hear it, but I always kind of appreciated that, like, hey, they just brought you in. They're like, hey, look, you know, the backup job is this guy's job to lose, and that's just the reality of it. And so I think that was a little that would be my preference, just be upfront about it. Because yeah, when I first got there, I had a really good rookie mini camp, had a lot of positive feedback, and like, hey, this is an open competition. So you show up there thinking it's going to be, and then you're like, damn, am I just playing like shit? Because they won't play me in the preseason, and they keep saying this is an open competition, but, like, I'm not getting any reps really. And so a couple days before cut day, Gary Kubiak, who was a big influence early on for me in my NFL career, he just said, hey, look, we think you're a really good player, but you need a year to develop. I want you to focus on these things, and we'll see where you're at in a year, but stay ready. And so he's basically a Hall of Fame coach, and he ran the scout team, got a lot of reps on scout team, which was good for my development. But ultimately, yeah, it was a weird deal. They don't really tell you.
So talk about the practice squad life. I spoke with your now teammate, Trent Irwin, episode 6 of this podcast, and he did 2 years of practice squad. He had been cut by Miami, who initially signed him out of school, and he just talked about it's just a grind. It's an everyday grind. He said, your games become the Friday practices, and you basically have to, hard code your brain to be in competition mode 24/7, because it's a battle. So talk about that period and how it actually goes day to day as a practice squad quarterback.
Yeah, I would say practice squad, like, you got to find a way to navigate three things. So there's guys that lose their confidence, there's guys that think they're getting screwed, and there's guys that are just happy to be there. And there's good and bad with all of those. So the guy that's getting screwed thinks he's getting screwed. He never loses his confidence, but he probably doesn't work that hard because he thinks he's just not getting screwed, or he thinks his coach just hates him. Uh, the guy that's just happy to be there, he's enjoyable to be around, probably doesn't work that hard, and probably will be there for a year and then get cut once they realize, okay, this guy hasn't gotten any better. And then there's the guy that starts to question his own ability. That guy works really hard, but when the moment comes, he doesn't think he's good enough to play in it. And so you got to find a way to navigate all three of those. Like, you got to be the guy that's working really hard, that is still enjoyable to be around, even though you're the lowest paid guy in the building, basically, or in the locker room. which is a whole nother conversation because it's still a lot of money. But you can start playing the comparison game, and that can drive you crazy. But then you also got to be the guy that doesn't lose your confidence because you got put on P squad. So yeah, it's hard. You got to come up with a routine. You got to build good habits because there's no one really making sure that you're doing anything, and they don't really know if you're doing anything until it's like time to decide if they're going to cut you or not. So yeah, it can be hard to like do that because you're basically self-regulating yourself, and no one really is like super invested in you. But it's really easy to just not do anything and not get any better. And so like I said, the habit, the weekly routines, the making up random projects, trying to find things for yourself to get better at. And you got to do it in pretty creative ways. So it's not like they're just saying, "Hey, here's a bunch of reps."
Right.
So I think that's kind of the P squad grind. And but I think if you can make it through that, you will be a much better player because of it.
So it sounds like you developed quite a bit during that time, took advantage of the reps, and got better during those years.
Yeah.
However, you end up getting cut in Minnesota in a pretty disappointing fashion.
Yes. Yep. And it's I think there's a lot of careers that end there. Um, I have no idea why Zach Taylor signed me. I think it's because he was listening to and reading like some of the media reports for the Vikings, and there was a time where he had a couple quarterbacks out with COVID related stuff, and I was the only one there for like 5 days and played really well, and there was a bunch of media reports about it, and so that was really the only reason my career didn't end, where a lot do, where you work really hard and at the end of the day it just doesn't work out. But at least I think some of those guys could be better, but for me I was always, hey, at least I got the peace of mind of knowing that I went all out and put everything I had into it. If it doesn't work out, sucks, but I don't have any regrets about it.
You talked about the hazards that come with being a practice squad player, and then when you numbered them out. How do you balance though, trying to say, I'm just gonna go all out, keep my foot on the gas, and just obsess, like you said, you were like you tended to do. You obsessed over ball and just really locking in on it, while also it's like, okay, but in being practical, you almost need like a contingency plan for your life or career in the back of your head. How did you balance that? Because it's like it would be a little bit foolish to have zero backup plan, but you also can't be devoting your time to thinking about building out your backup plan when you're still on that practice squad roster.
Yeah, I think for me, uh, I kind of thought I wanted to get into coaching afterwards. So I think just common sense wise, like, I mean, at least I'm getting my foot in the door that way too. It's a hard door to get opened, and I had been in the NFL and I had access to a lot of coaches, and I've always been really good in meeting rooms and pretty smart. So yeah, I think that there's definitely a peace of mind of like, okay, I'm not going to play, fall completely on my ass. I'm definitely not spending a bunch of money on dumb things and keeping expenses low. But I always invested in my development, and I think that was kind of what led to the development, was making sure that, hey, I'll go cheap on my car, or where I'm living or something like that, but I will spend to make sure that I'm getting access to the best information, just because of that experience I had after college, uh, working with some quarterback guys, and feeling like I got a lot better. And so just always trying to find what is that new information, that feedback that I need in order to improve my game, and not going cheap on that. And also knowing in the back of my mind that these are good things to know in case I do want to get into coaching. Like, there's not many coaches in the NFL that know mechanics and fundamentals like I do, because I've obsessed about it for myself.
So talk about the relationships with the starter in both of those clubs. You had Kirk Cousins in Minnesota and obviously Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. What's that relationship like? Where does it work the best? And what have you learned from those guys?
Yeah, I think I feel pretty fortunate with being in rooms with both of those guys, and they've always been pretty open book on hey, I never felt weird asking Kirk Cousins, like, hey, how'd you get to that guy? Like, pre-snap, I was in my mind, I'm like, pre-snap, I'm going here, and then he throws it over here. So I'm, okay, that worked. Like, what made him think that? And so he was always very open book with me. Um, and I think part of that is because, I earned that trust. Like I showed that, like, I do know what I'm doing. I can play pretty well, and I'll try and be as helpful as possible. And in both of those rooms, that went a long way. I think in Cincinnati, it was fortunate that my first game was against the Vikings, because I just been there for 2.5 years, and I could break down their whole team and kind of show, like, hey, like, I know football, and, like, I may not know this offense as well just because I just got here, but I can help you win this game. And so, obviously people that were actually playing won the game, but there was a lot of, like, scheme stuff that I kind of knew and could help them with. And so I just remember we're in the shower afterwards, and Joe Burrow goes, "Hey, keep talking to me on the sideline. Like, it's helpful." And so I just did for 2 years, and had a really good relationship, still do, with him. And it was funny when he did get hurt, felt like the roles were reversed a little bit, where he's kind of, half of it is when you come to the sideline as a quarterback, you're like, oh man, like, I feel like I kind of, could have gotten to this or could have thrown this. And half of what I would do for him is like, nah, like, I was throwing where you were, or, I saw what you saw. So it's like that reassurance in the moment, so you're not overthinking it in the middle of a game. And so it was kind of funny when it goes full circle, and all of a sudden he's doing that for me. And so yeah, good relationship with them. Just saw Kirk at a wedding. Still same old, same old. I think the representation of him on that quarterback Netflix show is about as accurate as you can get. I mean, this guy,
Really?
yeah, very genuine. I think he'll tell you he's kind of dorky, and but it's endearing, and it's genuine, and he is who he is, and he's not going to fake it for anybody. So yeah, feel very fortunate with both those guys.
So jumping into this past season, you guys are playing in a primetime game, and Joe gets hurt, and we can immediately tell everyone who was watching that he was very hurt. He wasn't going to be returning to that game, let alone coming back probably for weeks. What was going through your head when he comes off to the sideline? Obviously, you don't want to see your teammate hurt, but at the same time, this is your opportunity. What was your thought process as that was happening in real time?
Better start warming up. uh, yeah, better start warming up. He's had different little things that would happen, and you kind of come to the sideline, and then throw through it and be like, all right, I'm fine. I'm kind of sitting there like, all right, I'll throw a few, but, like, I've kind of seen this before. Then he goes to throw a ball, and he's like, I can't throw. I'm like, all right, well, now it's time to play. And there wasn't a whole lot of thought beyond that. I don't know why. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it wasn't a ton beyond that. I was just like, all right, you know, just go play. I think in the back of my mind somewhere I kind of knew too. Like, I'd been playing really good football in the preseason, training camp, and on scout team. Like, felt really good about where I was at in my development, and how I was playing, and so felt good. And then I think the first pass play was a naked to the left and threw an over route. And it's like, you get that first completion on the first play, and you're like, all right, here we go.
Yeah, and you were able to put together a pretty great string of games during your time as a starter this year. And one of the most memorable moments was you guys put together an awesome win over Minnesota, the team who had cut you, overtime. And you had one of the most spectacular viral clips of the season, in my opinion, letting the people know how you really felt into the camera. You very directly said, you should have never fucking cut me, into a camera for all the Minnesota fans and organization to hear. And it was just such an awesome moment of like, that is the type of passion and fire that, you want to see out of your quarterback. But tell me about some of the emotion that came with that, and the whole run, honestly, because you put together a lot of great performances.
Yeah, I think with that specifically, like, you're just playing it down in your head, like, just play the game, like, detach, hold it back, don't lose your mind. and then the game ended the way it did, and it's like you just unleash it. And I think that was one thing I learned too. Like I think up until last season, like I was always like, trying to be very calculated with media stuff, not give away too much, and then you kind of realize, like, I mean, I don't know, this sounds bad, but like we are in show business. Like at the end of the day, there's a reason people are interviewing you. It's because they want to know what it's like on a day to day. And so for me, like I feel like this year, like I had to do press conferences, I had to do a lot of different stuff, and just be an open book, be honest, be genuine about it. And so yeah, that was fully lost my mind, but it was a genuine reaction to just a lot of years of holding on to that and just letting loose. And so yeah, it happens. But as far as the run in general, yeah, I think it's a good starting point for me in my career, and hope to build off it. But yeah, anytime you play well, you want to take the good and the bad and try and grow from it. And so I had a lot of good games, had some not so good games, and trying to learn from both and not overthink the bad, don't overthink the good, and kind of know that at the end of the day, those reps are going to accumulate, and just keep trying to improve on those. And I'd say the other thing throughout my career is like anytime I've played, I've got like in the NFL, every time I play, I've gotten like you can watch yourself. Like it's hard to watch yourself on scout team because you're running some offense, so you just looked at a card. And so it's hard to develop off of that. And so that's kind of been nice this off season. Is like, okay, I do have like I think it's like 7.5 games worth of tape to watch on myself. Kind of like actually not try and guess what I need to improve at, but just look at it and be like, okay, this is what I need to get better at.
No, it was awesome to see that run for you this past season because it's so hyper competitive in the NFL, obviously, but it's kind of amazing where for me, I remember I was watching the game live when Joe got hurt and you came in, and it's like, oh, here comes Jake Browning. Like, I was wondering whatever happened to that guy. And it's like,
Right.
whatever happened to that guy? He was like Mr. Football, California high school, and tore it up at Washington, was, in the contention for the Heisman. And it's kind of like, well, no shit, he can still play. Like,
Yeah.
it was kind of like, oh, okay, he's going out there and tearing it up. Like, shocker, you know?
Yeah.
It's but that's just the nature of only 32 spots total in the world to be a professional quarterback.
Yep. And you can be in the top 32 of the world in your position, and the bottom, 15, 10 to 15 are getting replaced.
That's right.
So
Such a such an impossible role. So, all right, in closing here, I want to quickly transition and talk a little bit about I'm going to see you at the ASU GSV Summit, this big conference in San Diego, week after next, actually. And
hmm
I'll be there for work with GSV, and you'll be there because you're speaking on a panel with a bunch of other professional athletes in connection to a new company called PAC, the Pro Athlete Community, started by Chip Posek, who's a serious established entrepreneur in the space. But talk a little bit about what that is and what the extent of your involvement is and why now.
Yeah, I think so. I originally think PAC is pretty new. I attended this past February, and it's a pro athlete community, but it's they put on these things called business combines, and so I'm 27. I've never been in the professional world outside of football, and so you are definitely behind. Like someone like yourself, you played football at Stanford, you went to school, and then now assuming we're the same age, you've been in business for 5 years, and so I'm behind if I want to do anything like that, and so uh, we have this thing called tuition reimbursement, and so PAC qualifies for that, and so I can basically go to these business combines that they put on, and meet a bunch of different people in a bunch of different industries, and make some connections, because I've found that like I can get in touch with the networking part. Like they say, oh, you can reach anybody, and it's like yes, but how? Like you don't really know who to reach out to. You don't really know, like there's no vetting. Um, and you just hear the horror stories of some guy getting taken advantage of. Um, and so Pac has helped a ton with, me. I have a couple different things I'm interested in doing, and taking steps to already do that on my own. And I feel like going to that was an accelerator where, okay, you like, doing low income housing in Ohio and buying those up and managing them. Like here's some people that manage like a couple thousand properties, and here's how they do it. So you're like, okay, yeah, that's pretty valuable. I wouldn't have thought to reach out to that person. And then I think really where it comes in too is, our union, our players union tries to do some stuff, but I think a lot of it caters to the lowest common denominator. So you can sign up for a real estate thing. They'll have the Michael Jordan of real estate come to, speak at some conference thing, and it'd be like Michael Jordan explaining how to make a layup. And it's like, okay, that's Michael Jordan, and he's explaining the simplest thing in basketball. Like this is kind of a waste. And so I felt like Pac does a good job of kind of meeting every player that comes in, has a different level of experience outside of football, but they do a good job meeting you where you're at, putting you in contact with people, realizing that, hey, this is something attainable. All while for players, it's pretty much free.
And this is something that's for current and former athletes, right?
Yeah, I think they have two different ones because I think the benefit, the tuition benefit, is different. But yeah, the one I went to was mostly current players. There's a very complicated thing on our benefits, but yeah, I think there's a more intense one for people that are transitioning out of the NFL, and I think I'm not completely familiar with what it is, but it's definitely more like, okay, like you have to get a job, you have to figure out what the hell you're going to do, and so I think it's the number gets thrown around a lot. I don't know what exactly it is, but basically a lot of NFL players end up broke and end up miserable after they're done playing because they don't know, like I have a certain skill set that earns me a certain amount of money within football. But the second they don't want me to throw a football anymore, like that doesn't really matter that much. And so now now I'm competing with people like yourself that are in their fifth, sixth, seventh year of working in the professional world. It's like, okay, now what? Like I got to figure it out. Like, am I really going to go take a analyst job at a finance thing because I got a finance background and work with everybody that's 6 years younger than me? I mean, maybe. Or you got to figure something out. You got to start planning ahead a little bit. So that's where Pat comes in.
Right. The business combine sounds like a good model to facilitate that through. Well, Jake, thank you so much again. I look forward to catching up in person in San Diego in just a few days now, but I really appreciate you taking the time and taking us through it. That was awesome.
Yeah, appreciate it.